All right. Okay, so g'day. I thought I'd just get that out of the way. This is very unexpected. It's kind of awkward. I came here to see Mary Poppins. All right, today's about sharing stories and ideas in the hope that our own stories might change the way we think, it might inspire us to view the world in a different way. And so today I'm going to share with you my story. I'm going to tell you where I came from. As you can guess, I have an accent. I'm not from here. I'm from Athens. I'm going to tell you who I was as a little kid, where I went to as an adult, how I got lost and how I changed myself, the reasons why I changed, and then the benefits that's had to my life and my family's life. Hopefully you might be able to relate to some of this stuff. Some of it could be confronting, as you can see there. Who eats chicken? Anyone eats chicken? All right, you all have done that. You just paid someone, you just outsourced it. Okay, so my story starts back when Reagan was the king, and Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet album was the biggest selling album of the year. Does anyone remember back then? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's a long time ago. I have grey in my beard. My parents decided to move out of the city and buy a little farm in the country and start raising Hereford cattle, as you do. They were either early adopters of the tree change movement, or they were belated hippies from the 60s trying to escape a maddening modern world. But regardless, our farm was beautiful, picturesque, rolling green hills, beautiful, rich soil, high rainfall, fantastic for agricultural investment. And we sat in Victoria's Gippsland region with the Victorian alpine high country, snow-topped mountains always looking down, keeping an eye on us. And our farm had this little river that bordered our property. Not a very big river, and most of the locals would say that it's an insignificant river, but to me, it was an amazing river. To me, it was everything. It taught me so much. It taught me how to have a spirit of adventure, how to fish, how to kill, how to be brave. I was a 10-year-old boy when I found this river. It taught me patience. And if you knew me in the real world, you would laugh when I say that, because I'm very non-patient. Is there a word for that? Okay. So patience. I would sit at the end of a fishing line trying to catch fish, trout, blackfish, eel. I would sit there for hours and hours and hours as a kid. And Mum would be calling from the house to tell me to come in for dinner, but I was going to catch my own dinner. And if I was lucky enough to catch a trout, I'd bake it in aluminium foil. You guys got it so wrong. It's not aluminium. How do you say it? Aluminum. It's aluminium. Just kidding. I can't say that. I'm in America. I just bake the fish and just really appreciate the taste of wild fish. 10-year-old kid. We also used to catch these great things called freshwater crayfish. Now, you have crawfish, right? Everyone knows what... Okay, so a freshwater crayfish, we're talking Australia here. This is a crawfish on steroids. Big things they were. And early on a Sunday morning when the mist was still in the valley, the rest of the family was asleep, I'd sneak out with a box of matches, a billy can and a landing net. And I'd go out and I'd check my cray lines in the river. And I'd pull on that cray line. And if there was a cray on the end, I'd scoop it up with a landing net. I'd use the box of matches to start a little campfire, get some water out of the river. And a billy can's like a tin can. I'd boil that water on the fireplace and I'd pop that crayfish in there and have it for breakfast. As you can imagine, I was a little feral kid, a wild kid here. Not much has changed. It wasn't just the river that gave us loads of food. In the fields, we had wild mushrooms in autumn, fall. In summertime, we had wild berries. And my mum had this amazing vegetable garden, massive vegetable garden. And here I learnt the fundamentals of food production. My mum would she would gift me a handful of seeds, and she'd tell me how deep to plant them in the soil, how far apart from each other, and then she'd set me on the row and say, plant that whole row out. I'd wait a week for the plants to germinate, another week. Then finally they'd germinate. My babies had been born. They'd grow bigger and bigger and larger, and then when they were mature, they would flower. Insects would pollinate the flowers, and the flowers would turn into food, and we would eat. It was that simple. And I didn't realise at the time, but this was probably one of the best gifts my mother ever gave me. We also had chooks. Does anyone know what chooks are? I love saying this in America. Chooks are chickens. It's the Australian way of saying chickens. I don't even know why they're called chooks. They don't even say chook. It's not like they go around chook, chook, chook. They don't even say that, but they're called chooks in Australia, so it's very confusing for Americans. But they laid eggs. We had loads of eggs, and we were a Hereford farm, so we had steers and heifers, and most of them were for market, but some were for the family freezer. So we had loads of food. I didn't hunt much in those days. I am known as a hunter, although I grow more vegetables than I do hunt. But I did have a couple of hunting experiences with a kid that was a little bit older than me, and he had plenty of guns. And these were amazing life experiences for me. Not so much in the art of hunting itself, but it was an experience in human behaviour. Frustrated that he couldn't shoot a rabbit, he would go into the bush with a spotlight at night time and spotlight a possum. Now, a possum, it's Australia. They're squirrels on steroids. Are you getting there's a recurring theme here, Australia, big things. Massive things they are, big fluffy tails, live in trees, beautiful animals they are. Frustrated that he couldn't shoot a rabbit, he'd shoot it out of the tree. It'd bounce, fall from branch to branch, land on the ground, he'd walk over to it. If it wasn't dead, he'd put another round into it. He killed for the sake of killing. Now, this was a concept that put me off being a hunter for a long time. I couldn't understand the concept, the ability of humans to kill without purpose. As a teenager, I was horrible at school. I was more interested in girls and motorbikes. If there was a girl on a motorbike, I'd be even more interested. My grades were horrible, and so my parents sent me to a school in the city of Melbourne. Sorry, I should say that, Melbourne. In the hope that my grades would get better. Now, this was a blessing and a curse, this. We kept the farm, and I went to the school Monday to Friday and then returned to the farm on the weekends. As a teenage boy, it was a curse for me. I missed out on all the parties. All that social development made me an awkward person. Funny person. But it was a blessing because I got to go to the farm and be in my natural environment, and that's where I felt the most real. It was the real version of Rowan. But I could also see two different worlds. The contrast was phenomenal. In one world during the week, I would be in the human-built environment. There was always a sense of urgency. There was a sense of consumerism. It was loud, it was noisy. We know cities. And then back home on the farm, there was natural beauty. There were forests that have been there before the European invasion of Australia. Forests that have been there prior to Aboriginals occupying Australia. They didn't need human intervention. The animals and the trees and the environment, they lived happily without us. But the city I could see as a young kid relied on everything for its survival from nature. From the packaging of food, from the clothes we wear, everything requires some element of nature, where it be a fossil fuel or a natural resource. Everything comes from nature. This started to get me thinking as a young teenager with a bit more of an environmental bent. I became a greenie. Do you have greenies in America? A greenie is like an environmental thinking, philosophical person that usually change themselves to trees and such like. I started reading a lot of philosophy about the green movement and how we were treating our natural world. I could see problems all around me. Near our farm, there was this beautiful temperate rainforest that was being harvested to make 3-ply toilet paper. Now, don't get me wrong. Like that guy said yesterday, we've got to wipe our butts. We need toilet paper. This was prior to the advent of recycled toilet paper. Do you have recycled toilet paper here? Okay, it's not like toilet paper that is recycled. It's from office paper. Just let me get that clear. So these guys were logging all this forest. It was a beautiful forest. And there was guys, greenies there, they would chain themselves to trees and bulldozers and equipment, but they weren't having much of an impact. And I came up with a brilliant idea. A massive fan of Clint Eastwood films. I decided that I could go in like a bushranger, like a cowboy outlaw, on horseback, deep in the bush, come down from the mountains, find where all the equipment was stored on the weekends, where the loggers left all their bulldozers, their tractors, their chainsaws in sheds. I could go in there while no one was there on the weekend with blocks of TNT. You see where I'm going here? Bam! Blow it up, sky high. They wouldn't be able to do any more logging. It's a brilliant idea. There's only one flaw. I didn't own a horse, nor did I have access to TNT. So I had to come up with a different, less radical plan that would end me up in juvie. And so it was at that time I fell in love with biology, the study of life, absolutely mesmerised by it. And I wanted to apply for this course at university called Environmental Management. And just before I signed the papers, the government sacked 2/3 of the industry in that sector. My future was gone. So this thing called the World Wide Web was just really beginning to take off in Australia. We're a little slow. And so I studied computer sciences. And this is where I really got lost. This is where I lost my path. And this is mostly what my story is about. It's taking different paths. I found myself as a university graduate working for Australia's largest retail company, Coles Myer. These guys own everything. Department stores, supermarkets, liquor shops, car maintenance shops, office supplies, car insurance, home insurance. They own everything. And I was in there. I was part of it. I was wearing my Hugo Boss suit. I shaved my face. I had a flip phone. I was really cool and I loved it, you know, and I got sucked into it like a Star Trek tractor beam. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved the money. I loved the company car. I liked the fact that if I worked my butt off, I'd get higher and higher up the corporate ladder, make loads more money. One day I'd have my 2-story house with my brand new BMW. After a couple of years, I began to grow restless. Something wasn't quite right. I began to ask questions. Is this as good as it gets? Me acquiring all this stuff in my life, wanting to have this money, to have all these fancy suits or loads of, like nice televisions and computers and stuff. Was that it? Was that my life? As a restless individual, I decided the best thing I could do would be to go for a drive. Now, I don't know if you know, Australia is a large continent, right down the bottom of the world. It's mostly desert. I drove for weeks and weeks, trying to think, trying to discover some answers. It was a lot of lost highway, a lot of desert country, a lot of Bob Dylan. The Australian landscape, so vast and powerful, reminded me of my human insignificance in the scheme of things. My self-importance was completely diminished. My country had put me back in my place. By the time I returned back to the cubicle, I was a different bloke. I was a different man. I viewed everything completely different. I thought if I changed jobs, maybe that might help. But all it did was move me from one building to another. It was the same questions that I was asking myself. Is this as good as it gets? Is this what my life is going to be? Frustrated, I got to the point in time where I walked into the CEO's office and I said, "Look, mate, I can't do this anymore. I've got to leave." That was when I was hurriedly escorted out of the office by the security guards. And that was it. That was my last corporate job. I remember standing at the front of that building, forcing myself not to look back at the faces pressed against the window, asking the question, what the hell has he just done? In front of me was a future, an unknown future, and it was fantastic. My wife and I moved to a regional university city, and I finally got to study that course, which was now called Natural Resource Management. And here I was vindicated. My philosophy was vindicated. There was science behind how our natural resources are utilised, managed and mismanaged to benefit human Western culture. I learnt everything from the agriculture, what chemicals were used in the production of grains and vegetables. I learnt about how our biodiversity in the Western world is diminishing. I put on Twitter the other day a list of Victorian threatened species the government has released in Victoria, Australia. It is disgusting. It is a massive list of endangered species. But it was great to see some science backing to my theory. I studied hard as I did my first university course, and I ended up landing a job for a government agency called the Department of Sustainability and Environment. I thought, yay, I'm here. I'm a public servant in an government sector. I can really implement some significant change. I'd never been a public servant before. I didn't realise that you can't make any change as a public servant. So here I am. I got the whole package by this stage. I'm married, I got some kids, 2 beautiful daughters. I really should have brought some slides for that. Been totally outdone by everybody else. But let me tell you, mine are the cutest. Anyway, so I had the whole deal, right? And I had the mortgage, I had a couple of car loans, I had maxed out credit cards, I had a loan for the couch, loan for the washing machine, a loan for the dog. I was financially maxed out. And, you know, there's a lot of people in that situation these days. And that's quite scary. I was speaking to a banker the other day in a very casual conversation. He said, banks make all their money from credit cards, from maxed out credit cards, more than they do from home loans in Australia. I had to pick up the financial shortfall. So I started working as a freelance photographer on Saturdays. So now I was working 6 days a week, taking photos, and then often I was working of evenings, photoshopping all the images. I was very busy. I did this for a number of years. Then I started to change. My health began to deteriorate. I became bigger and bigger and bigger. My sizes increased and increased. I relied heavily on my vices, all the fun vices. I ate supermarket processed food, anything that I could open the packet, whack it in the microwave or the oven and press some buttons. I ate loads of takeaway food. I sat at a desk on a computer most of my life. The result was a very unhealthy version of Rohan. It got to the stage that I was so unhealthy I started having severe anxiety and panic attacks. Now this is very embarrassing for me to communicate this to you. But my lifestyle choices started to impact on me physically speaking. I ended up in emergency wards quite often, having severe attacks, not really knowing what was wrong with me, not wanting to admit what was wrong with me. I suffered from depression. I'd had paramedics come visit me at the office when I had attacks. I was severely overweight. I was clinically obese. And it got to the stage where I went to my GP, and he's my family GP, and he'd seen me slowly deteriorate for a couple of years. And he got me down and finally did all those tests, and I was immediately medicated for high blood pressure, extreme high blood pressure, anxiety and depression. I was told if I do not start changing my life, I am an absolute candidate for early onset of type 2 diabetes and heart disease. I was looking down the barrel of an early departure. And I was in my early 30s, and I had the body of a worn-out old man. And that was my lifestyle choice that had done that to me. So here I am at the crossroads again. I had 2 choices. I could take the medication, I could fix the symptoms and hope for the best and continue my lifestyle. Or I could take the other option, which was quite scary, and completely change my life. Completely move the goalposts. And I took this option. First, I started identifying the things that were making me sick. The obvious culprits were my lifestyle choice and the food. I'm going to talk a little bit about the food now. The obvious choice for me to start looking at was fat content, sugar content, salt content for high blood pressure. These were the things that I could see having a direct impact on my health. Then I started looking at my food and asking a lot more questions. There's a lot of hidden stuff in our food. Additives, preservatives, sulfates, phosphates, pesticides, herbicides, agricultural antibiotics. That's all in the food that I was eating. I also, with an environmental attitude, I started looking at what were the environmental implications of the food I was eating. Everything I was eating from the supermarket or takeaway had some sort of packaging. All of that has an environmental implication. It's using natural resources. It's putting stuff into the atmosphere, putting stuff into our rivers. Everything, paper, plastic, metal, everything, the packaging. I started looking at where my food was coming from. It was coming from Italy and Mexico and Peru. It was coming from all over the place. So all that was carbon emissions. I realised that I had to make a change in the way I acquired my food. I had to eat whole foods. And so I did what any good bearded middle-class hipster would do. I went running for the nearest farmer's market. I found a farmer's market, and by the time I got through the artisan soaps and the chocolate-coated pretzels, I found behind there some fruit and vegetables and meat. But it was never enough for me. I needed the staples. And so I realised that no company would have the best interest of my health, my grocery lists, in their best interest. I'd have to do it myself. So I ripped up my backyard in the city and I started planting vegetables, like I did as a kid. I had loads of vegetables in there. I had towers of pumpkins and corn. I had fruit trees and nut trees, tiny little backyard, loads of food. But I didn't have any space to raise animals for meat, so I had to reluctantly take up hunting. And I started hunting rabbits. And that was a new skill for me. And I remember buying my gun, going through all the hoops, and taking the rifle out to a paddock where I had approval to hunt rabbits. And I was sighting through the scope this rabbit. Got the crosshairs on the head, and I remember looking at it, and I had this ethical discussion. You can't kill an animal, but hang on, you've been killing animals all this time. You've been eating chicken and beef and all that. You've been doing it, you've just been outsourcing it. You've got to do it. And I'm having this discussion. The rabbit's like, oh, what is this hipster on about? And so I eventually pulled the trigger and the rabbit fell over on the ground. I think I'd been sighting him in for so long, it went right through one eye and out the other. It was dead in an instant. I walked over, proud as punch, shaking. I looked down at the rabbit. Oh, shit. Now what do? I can't eat it like that. It's got fur on it. So skinning a rabbit, gutting a rabbit, these are skills that I had to learn. I had to learn a load of different skills. So many skills, from how to make a sausage, how to make bacon, how to make a jam, how to do canning, how to cook all these different recipes. So many different skills that I started writing it down. I thought, if I'm finding this interesting, maybe somebody else might find it interesting. So I put it on the internet, on this blog called Whole Larder Love. And I did that for a couple of years, and then some publisher said, hey, how about you write a book? Okay, cool. What should we call it? Whole Larder Love sounds like a good idea. And so I got this book out. Now, during the process of writing a book, unfortunately, my marriage crumbled and I became divorced. But, being blessed, I found a new partner. She has the same philosophy about life, food and kids. So her kids and my kids moved out to this old farmhouse where I was allowed to grow more vegetables, have a chicken shed or a chook shed. I had a big polytunnel so I could grow vegetables in the snow. I've got a smokehouse so I could smoke my meat. There's plenty to hunt. There's deer, there's quail, there's duck. There's forests where I can go forage for wild mushrooms like any good bearded hipster would do. There's berries, there's old fruit trees, there's nut trees. There's food everywhere. I found all this food everywhere. It's all natural. It's organic. It's free range. Our lifestyle now is completely dictated to by the seasons, just like in Atlanta probably 100 years ago, where you grow everything from spring to summer to autumn. You grow like crazy, and then you squirrel that away so that really lean time through winter, you've got food in your larder. It'll get you through the lean times. That's our life now. Now, I may not hold down a regular job. I may write as a freelance writer. I sell some organic vegetables to hipsters in Melbourne. And I run these workshops where I share my skills, how to skin and gut a rabbit and fillet a trout and all sorts of stuff. And I'm running one of these workshops in Wisconsin. If you want to come along, hit me up. I don't earn much money. I don't have a regular job. But I'm the busiest I've ever been, and I love it. I don't earn much money, but there's some days where I feel like I'm the richest bloke in the world. I have everything I want. I've reduced all my material acquisition. I've got rid of all my debt. I have no credit card, no home loan. I have nothing. I have a couple of guns, some fishing rods, and a willingness to work for my food. I now live with purpose. I'm mindful about the choices that I make in life. And that is where I am right now. So what does all this mean to you guys? You're here, you're entrepreneurial, you like startup companies. How does this relate to you? Surely it's got to be more about this guy that's come all the way from Australia to tell you about growing vegetables, hunting bunny rabbits and prancing through the forest looking for wild mushrooms. Although that is a pretty interesting story. Maybe it's about finding issues, identifying issues in front of us that are so scary that sometimes we put them aside and we don't deal with them. For me, my challenge was an early departure from this world because of my own lifestyle choices. That was the biggest challenge for me. I had that crossroads moment where I could choose to take medication and to not make any change, or I could make change, and it was quite scary and I had no idea where it would take me. I still have no idea where it would take me. But I took action, and that's the important thing. I know that there are problems with our food that we eat, our lifestyle choices. I know because I have lived it. I know because I stand in front of you today in a shirt that is 3 sizes smaller than what I was wearing a couple of years ago. I've had to buy new belts. It is so annoying because my waistband has gone in. I haven't gone on any amazing diet. I've just lived with nature. But the thing is, in the future, in future generations, I constantly ask myself, as a world community, as the Western world, what will we be known for? If we take no action for the challenges and the problems and the issues we see in front of us, and if we're apathetic, what will we be known as? Will we be known as mindless consumers? Or will we be known as people that made significant change for our communities? And apathy is our biggest challenge. Because a world with no action is going to be a world full of unhealthy, unhappy consumers. And that's going to mean unhappy, unhealthy us, unhealthy planet. Thank you very much.